Prince Andrew, the Duke of York, issued a statement in tribute to his mother, addressed to Mummy, Mother, Your Majesty, 3 in 1. He said, Your Majesty, it has been an honour and privilege to serve you.
The royal family gathered in Buckingham Palace recently to read the last will of Queen Elizabeth. Queen Elizabeth did. She must share her wealth and estates. She left messages about power, legacy, and the future of the British crown.
So there are some disadvantages to crowns, but otherwise they're quite important things.
However, in a twist of tradition, Prince Andrew, not King Charles, was chosen to read it. Why was Andrew given this responsibility? And what did Queen Elizabeth give to who? Join us as we bring you all the shocking details of Queen Elizabeth's inheritance. Prince Andrew reads Queen Elizabeth's will. Prince Andrew finally read the will of Queen Elizabeth recently. Buckingham Palace had never felt so silent. The kind of quiet that fills a room full of secrets, so severe that no one dares to speak. For years, it was a moment that had been seen as inevitable. But in reality, it had always been just out of reach. Now, they were gathered in the drawing room of Buckingham Palace, each dressed in dark colors, their faces set, their eyes avoiding each other. Everyone was in the same room, but had a different reason for being there. Some came with expectations, others with doubt. But one thing was clear. They all knew the importance of this moment. This was the reading of the Queen's last will, a document that could change everything. And no one knew what the outcome would be. It was Queen Elizabeth's last message, a final word from a woman who had ruled for 70 years. The weight of that fact made everything feel different, more significant somehow. Keep watching to understand why it felt so strange and heavy. The will was not just about who got what, or who was left out. This moment would define their family, roles, and maybe even the monarchy's future. In the center of the room stood Prince Andrew. Of all people, it had fallen to him uncomfortable. And honestly, many people in the room were uncomfortable with the idea. Why Andrew? He wasn't the obvious choice, not by a long shot. Everyone had expected Charles to take on the task, or maybe even Anne, but not Andrew. There were murmurs about his competence. Some felt he lacked the gravitas for a job like this. But he was standing in front of the family, the one who had to deliver the words that could alter the course of everything. Andrew wasn't exactly comfortable with it either. He stood awkwardly in front of the table, the envelope resting there, its wax seal still intact. As he stared at it, the weight of his mother's trust and the pressure of his family's eyes now hung heavily on his shoulders. He wasn't sure if he could carry it, but he had no choice. He had to. He took a deep breath, his hands shaking slightly as he ran for the envelope. The seal cracked open, and its soft sound echoed in the room. As he pulled the first page, there was finally slight tension. "This is my last will," he began, and for a brief second it almost felt as though the Queen herself had spoken those words. The mood of everyone in the room shifted. Some felt relief, and others felt anxiety. As Andrew began to read, he realized how much his mother's words would reveal. Her words were simple, her gratitude for the family's support and dedication to the monarchy. But then, as he moved on to the specifics, things became more personal. The Queen gave instructions to her children, starting with Charles. "To my dear son Charles," Andrew recited. The words were formal, but the message was clear. Charles was to take care of Windsor Castle. No surprises there. He'd been groomed for this role his whole life. Charles didn't react much. He just gave a slight nod, a subtle acknowledgement of his position. But then, things took a turn. "I have given Sandringham Estate to my daughter Anne," Andrew read. That was the first surprise. Sandringham was one of the most essential properties in the royal family's possession. It had always been tied to the king. Now, It was going to Anne? The room shifted, eyes darting. Anne didn't show much, but the flicker of surprise on her face was hard to miss. Charles's brow squeezed slightly, a sign of his discomfort. This wasn't what he had, and he didn't entirely approve. But Andrew didn't stop. He moved on to the next will, which was about to reveal something about the next part of the will that left everyone speechless. Let's find out. Breaking from royal traditions. Queen Elizabeth decided to break from royal traditions. She gave some properties that used to be granted to a single person to the family as a whole. She also gave collective properties to specific individuals. It started with the Balmoral estate. It will hold a shared purpose, Andrew read. It would no longer be under the control of one person, but instead it would be shared between several family members. Balmoral was a sacred place, holding the family's most cherished memories. Sharing it wasn't just practical, it was deeply symbolic. And not everyone agreed with that choice. Charles, in particular, seemed bothered as Andrew continued. The personal touches in the will didn't stop there. Andrew's voice changed as he moved on to the younger generation. To Catherine, Duchess of Cambridge, he read, "I give the Vladimir Tiara, which stands for grace and continuation." Catherine's eyes flickered with gratitude, but she didn't smile. The tiara was a symbol, sense of history, and now it was hers. A message from the Queen. Catherine would be the future of the monarchy. Next, Andrew moves on to Prince George and Princess Chashiqueen's words that George has a responsibility. As the future king, George had a responsibility that went beyond the advice, which was only as strong as its people, Andrew read. The advice hit harder than expected, especially with the room's current tension. Everyone was waiting for what would come next. Finally, the moment everyone had been dreading arrived. Andrew's voice dropped as he read Prince Harry's name. "I leave a ceremonial sword that once belonged to King George VI," Andrew read. The sword was a powerful symbol, one that had been passed down through generations. But the room's reaction was immediate. William Somethings shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Something about how the Queen had left the sword to Harry felt loaded. Was it an offering of peace, or was it a subtle warning? Andrew continued reading the will. The gifts, the estates, and the advice all pointed to a future that was still uncertain. The Queen had done what she could to lay out a plan, but it wasn't a clear-cut road. And now, her family had to figure out how to move forward. As Andrew concluded the reading, something more was coming that would shake them all to the core. The room was filled with questions. What did the Queen's decisions mean? And more importantly, what would happen next? Keep watching to find these answers and tense more. Palace insiders revealed that the atmosphere grew more tense after reading the will. King Charles had always expected that he would inherit everything. Windsor Castle? Of course, it was his. Balmoral? That should have been his too. But no, it wasn't just his. It was now going to be shared. The very idea of sharing Balmoral was a slap in the face to tradition. The family had always come together there, but it had always been under the leadership of the current king. Now, there would be multiple people involved in its care. As Andrew read these words, you could feel a shift in energy in the room. Let's talk about how everyone reacted to the will. Reactions to Queen Elizabeth's will. Charles was visibly disturbed. His jaw was clenched, his hands resting firmly on his knees. His face appeared unreadable, but the frown told everyone how he felt. He disagreed with this. He didn't like it. But that wasn't all. As the will went on, it was clear the Queen had made some bold choices. Anne, who had always quietly done her duty, was now entrusted with Sandringham, and that wasn't something she had expected either. Anne wasn't one to show much emotion, but the slight change in her posture was enough for anyone to see her surprise. This was huge. Sandringham was the family estate. It had been part of their history for generations. To be given it was not just an inheritance to her. It was a responsibility beyond just keeping the land in the family. It was about the future of the monarchy itself. Meanwhile, Charles was fighting to keep his composure. His usual calm was cracking. He shifted in his seat, his fingers tapping nervously on the armrest. He wasn't just upset by the division of Balmoral. He was bothered by the fact that this was not what he had hoped for altogether. Many things were not just adding up. Things were falling out of his plan. Of course, the Queen had given him Windsor, but that wasn't enough. This was about more than property. It was about his place and honor, his role as king. And now, it felt like the Queen had changed everything he thought he knew about his future. William was sitting next to Catherine. He seemed to be doing his best to stay neutral. He stared at his father but quickly looked away. It wasn't his place to speak out. But his eyes told a story. He wasn't ready to take the throne, but he could see how the pieces were falling into place. Catherine, ever the supportive wife, sat quietly next to him. She didn't move, didn't fidget, but her eyes were sharp, taking everything in. She knew this moment would change their lives, and she wasn't sure if that was good. The Queen's choices, while seemingly well thought out, were creating a whirlwind of uncertainty. And for Catherine, that uncertainty was something she would have to tread carefully.
Buckingham Palace is in shock as Prince Andrew reads Queen Elizabeth's final will, not King Charles. What secrets did the Queen leave behind? Watch the full story of power, legacy, and royal drama unfold.
The Vladimir tiara, the British symbol of grace and continuity, was hers now. But was that enough? Or was it another reminder of the weight she was expected to carry in the future? Some were murmuring in the background, but no one spoke. Not yet. Andrew's voice cut through the tension as he read the next part of the will. They all thought the reading was over, but Andrew was still reading. It was a surprise, but this is where they all got what they felt they deserved. Will they get it? Keep watching to find out. Second part of Queen Elizabeth's will. Surprisingly, the second part of Queen Elizabeth's will begins when the first part stops. It is about Harry again. I want Harry to take good care of the ceremonial sword of King George VI. It was like a bomb had been dropped. Harry wasn't there, of course. He hadn't been there for a while now. Remember, he had relocated to the United States together with Meghan. But his name was still a part of this. And that ceremonial sword, it had meaning, real meaning. It wasn't just a family item. The sword stood for service and power, a reminder of the strength of the monarchy and the family's history. But there was something else about it. A message, maybe, but that is not all. William struggled to control the rage bubbling up inside him. He didn't like this. Harry had made his choices and walked away from the family. So why was he still being included? Why was he still getting this kind of recognition? Charles, too, was struggling. His calm demeanor was slipping. The sword was a sign of respect, but it reminded everyone in that room of everything Harry had done. Harry had left the family. He'd stepped away from the monarchy. And now, to have this powerful symbol handed to him? It didn't sit well with anyone, especially not William or Charles. Anne, however, remained unshaken. She was used to this. She had seen this family's divisions before and learned to deal with them. But even she couldn't hide the tiny flicker of surprise when the sword was mentioned. The sword was a big statement, and no one in that room quite knew how to take it. Andrew didn't dwell long on the subject. He quickly moved on. To my great-grandchildren, Prince George and Princess Charlotte, I leave not only the treasures of our family, but also the knowledge I've gained over the years. Catherine's heart must have been racing. This was it. This was when the Queen's faith in her children was laid bare for all to see. The pressure to carry on the legacy wasn't just about wearing the tiara or keeping the estates. It was about shaping the future of the monarchy, about living up to the ideals the Queen had held for so long. But then, as Andrew read on, the tension did not stop. Andrew took a deep breath before speaking again, knowing that what he was about to read would change many things. The monarchy's future wasn't just about the estates or the titles anymore. It was about the younger royals, George, Charlotte, and Louis, and their role as the monarchy moved forward. And that's when Andrew started reading the part of the will about them. George, the eldest of the children, was the one who everyone had been watching closely. He was already in line for the throne at just 8 years old. The pressure on him was much. Then there was Charlotte, the spirited younger sister. Her role in the monarchy's future is much more flexible, but the Queen's words made it clear that she had just as much responsibility as George. The Queen had always been keen on keeping the monarchy balanced, ensuring each member had a significant role, no matter their title. And now, Charlotte's part in this legacy was being laid out before everyone. Catherine's hand gently touched William's as they both listened. There was no doubt that this moment was essential for them, too. As parents, they understood the stakes. They weren't just raising their children. They were preparing them to take on roles that would shape the future of their country. The Queen had given them the tools, the tiara for Catherine, and the treasures for George and Charlotte, but it wasn't just about the material things. It was the knowledge, the lessons they had learned over decades. The wisdom passed down from one monarch to the next. Andrew looked at everyone's faces across the room again before he moved to the next page. "To my great-grandson, Prince Louis," he continued, reading the final part addressing the youngest royal. "I leave a letter written by hand, a letter for you to learn from, to guide you as you grow." Louis was only a few years younger than George, but the Queen's message for him seemed just as important. She had left him something far more personal than jewels or property, a letter. And in that letter would be the words of a monarch who had lived through it all, had seen the highs and lows of life, and had learned how to balance duty with compassion. Louis, though young, would be expected to understand and carry that forward when the time came. As Andrew finished reading, there was a moment of stillness. We have come to the final moments of Queen Elizabeth's will, and some of her last words will surprise you, as they also rattled the royal family members. The final part of Queen Elizabeth's will. The final moments of the reading felt like a quiet storm. Still slightly shaking, Andrew's hands carefully folded the will's last page. He put it down on the table, his eyes scanning the room, but his words were slow, measured. He spoke about the Queen's simple but essential wish. She wished they could find unity amidst division, strength during hardship, and meaning in the service of others. He reminded them that strong ties connected them, but those ties needed care, understanding, and mercy to endure. Everyone in the room seemed moved by the Queen's call for togetherness. It was a message that felt urgent, almost as if it had been meant for them, not just as a family, but as a monarchy. As usual, Anne kept her emotions in check. Her face was calm, but her eyes, for just a moment, betrayed her. As Andrew read, Queen Elizabeth acknowledged Anne's role as the family's anchor. She had been the one to hold it all together in times of instability, quiet, steady, and unwavering. That moment of recognition was decisive. Anne wasn't one to seek validation, but it was clear that her mother had seen her and recognized her strength, even if she rarely expressed it. She gave her mother a slight nod to show that she understood what she said. Andrew paused, his gaze shifting toward Charles. It was clear from Andrew's expression that these words were meant to reach everyone, whether they were ready to hear them. Andrew cleared his throat, glanced back at the document, and continued. He shared the Queen's hope for the future of the family and the monarchy. She had hoped they would change, adapt, and grow stronger with each new generation. The Queen reminded them Their legacy wasn't just about the crown they passed down to their children. It was about the ideals they lived by, the kindness they showed, and the relationships they built with the people they served. Above all, she emphasized that they were not just one person. They were part of something bigger than themselves. That is not all. The Queen had also hoped that each new generation would continue to carry the torch for the monarchy and the values that defined it. The crown was a symbol of that legacy, but it was the relationships, the service, and the care that would genuinely define their reign. As Andrew finished reading, he told them the Queen's work wasn't over. Now, it was their job to carry it on. The room sat in profound silence, but it wasn't the uncomfortable quiet from earlier, but a peaceful, full of thought. Each family member is lost in their reflections. Charles was the first to break the silence. His voice was calm, though there was an undeniable firmness in his words as he addressed the room. He reminded them that their mother's words were a call to action. The responsibility they carried wasn't just a privilege, but a duty. He spoke about the need for complete dedication to the task at hand. His words held weight, and the others nodded in agreement, their faces a mix of determination and contemplation. Even though each had different ways of processing the moment, the Queen's vision for the future helped them focus on what they shared and what united them as a family. Anne stayed behind as the family began to move toward different corners of the room to reflect on the reading. The papers were folded neatly before her, and she didn't rush to leave. She sat still, staring at them, lost in her thoughts. The room was now quiet. The Queen's words played over and over in her head. She could hear her mother's voice in those words, a call to strength and a plea for unity. There was no denying the message. The job ahead of her family was much, but Anne had always been prepared for it. Her role had never been easy, and it never would be. She stood slowly, carefully folding the will back into its envelope. Anne took one final moment to be still, to collect herself before stepping back into the world outside. It had been a difficult day, but her mother had taught her to be strong, and once again, Anne would carry that strength forward.
Buckingham Palace is in shock as Prince Andrew reads Queen Elizabeth's final will, not King Charles. What secrets did the Queen leave behind? Watch the full story of power, legacy, and royal drama unfold.